We got an exceptional panel. I've had the pleasure of moderating a few panels in the cannabis space over the past few years, and this pre-call was the most interesting one. So this is going to get pretty interesting, and there's a lot of audience participation. So get ready. Okay. So if you don't mind, we're going to start down at the end with John. John, introduce yourself. We'll come on down the line, and then we'll get things going.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Harlow. Background, I have my PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, where I did marijuana research, then got my law degree. Spent 6 years on the hemp side. Now I'm working for Village Farms as GC for global cannabis. And then recently I served on the state task force for developing regulations on intoxicating cannabinoid products in Colorado. That's about it.
Danielle?
Bernstein, and I'm the president of Laurel Crest. We are a family-owned and operated hemp ingredient manufacturing company out of Oregon, and have been in the industry between Europe and the U.S. since 2015.
My name is John. I just put on my Do Not Disturb on my watch. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I've got 4 kids, a couple guys here who are the real experts, but we've got a vertical business in Missouri called Proper Cannabis, and it's been a cool team to build.
Morgan Paxia, co-founder of Poseidon. Been in the cannabis industry now for almost 11 years, investing in all kinds of businesses, and have a little bit of exposure on the hemp side, and very interested in today's discussion.
So like I said, unbelievable panel, very knowledgeable, et cetera. So we're going to hear some interesting things. One of the first things we talked about is that the panel topic is hemp versus marijuana. Is it the right word in the middle? Is it versus? Is it and? Or is it really versus? So first audience participation. Get ready, folks. Okay. Who thinks hemp should be regulated like cannabis? Show your hands. All right. I like that. Yeah, maybe kind of, sort. Yeah. Well, what's regulation without enforcement? You're a good straight man. We'll talk about that too, possibly. But panel, I have my back turned. Who thinks it should be regulated?
I think we all raised our
Yeah,
hand.
they all did.
Like marijuana is what you said, though.
Well, yes. So Danielle, since you just volunteered, grab that mic and go.
I definitely, coming from hemp manufacturing, believe that we should be, our mission is safe and effective access to plant medicines. And so safety is at the top of that list. And so regulation would help us ensure that consumers are safer than they are today, because there's a diversity of different kinds of manufacturing environments in which hemp is operating. And so really, I can kind of go down to self-regulation, but that's a huge part of the hemp industry as I am seeing it, is that the people who are rising to the top and leveling up are self-regulating. And so it's kind of on the operator and manufacturer to ensure the safety of the consumer rather than any kind of agency that's really helping, standardized testing to auditing facilities.
Folks, come on. You all had opinions on that prep call. And yet we had some very interesting variations of the opinions, as you
I had a
imagine.
meeting a while back with the former chief marketing officer of Cheez-Its and Pringles, and he said, "Hey, John, have you ever read the back of a Pringles box?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you should look at it, because the ingredients are there to, keep you eating more, right? You don't just have one Cheez-It, or one Pringle." And I think cannabis is the same thing. We got to know what we're consuming. And as the father of 4 kids, I think we deserve to make sure that we've got standards, with how it is people are consuming. And if people don't know what they're taking, or people aren't, required to follow rules and regulations, it gets very, very ambiguous. But ultimately, it starts with the customer, the patient. They deserve the highest standards. And I think when you don't have rules, it's hyper problematic.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with everything. You need a basic minimum floor for all this. Otherwise, the race to the bottom continues. And this job has taught me one thing is you can have all the regulations in the world you want. Without enforcement, it doesn't mean a damn thing. In fact, it does the opposite because those that try to comply obviously assume those capital costs of compliance, whereas the other side doesn't. And so they essentially get subsidized. So that's what we're seeing right now. You see this patchwork of regulations across the states, and just dealing with that alone is becoming almost untenable.
Maureen, you want to add anything to that, or go to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I think just adding some color here is, and the challenge we're seeing out there is age verification is not being enforced because there is no real enforcement. And from us being in this industry for a long time, we feel like there's a burden placed on the legal industry if this is getting into kids' hands, and we don't want to be handling that because it shouldn't be, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if it's intoxicating and brain development and all that, it's very important that this is getting nipped in the bud sooner than later because it's a huge industry already, and certainly not for banning, but for creating a sustainable industry. And it's wild that there's this perceived divide when we should be working together. You know, the last thing we need is another voice in DC that's bringing a different perspective instead of trying to achieve the larger objective, which is a safe and regulated industry, and that's a betterment for the consumers overall.
So is it 2014 all over again?
It certainly feels like it. You know, there's elements of this that feels kind of like the e-cig craze. You know, we were involved in that. Unfortunately, fortunately, depending on how you looked at it, it was one of the greatest booms. And, you know, when you let things get out of control, unfortunately, when the government comes knocking, you're not going to like the result. And so it's better if you can be ahead of that. And, you know, we're fans of like an SRO, self-regulatory organization, or if the industry could come together and start collaborating to get ahead of some of these issues. Because the last thing we want is just this idea of trying to shut it down, and that doesn't do anything. Because again, when you have a lack of enforcement, it doesn't mean it ceases to exist. It just ceases to exist from their purview, and that's where even more risk can be created.
So that's the second time SROs have come up. You know, Danielle mentioned it, you mentioned it, et cetera. You know, what would that framework look like? How does anybody think that could be attempted? You know, because when you talk about the unified voice and the industry doesn't need more lobbyists and more groups, et cetera, is that really attainable, you know, in your mind under any of the guidelines that are proposed today, Farm Bill or otherwise? It's obviously very complex and a lot of opinions and a lot of data points, but you guys are in it.
So happy to keep talking here unless you guys want to jump in, but
Please jump in too.
yeah, for sure.
Morgan, go.
But the idea is we need standards around testing, we need standards around distribution, we need standards around packaging, age verification, you know, all the things that actually exist in the legal cannabis industry. And so, you know, you could imagine operators large and small coming together that are voicing their opinions and creating panel around, you know, what are good, safe practices. I mean, there's technologies around this too. So it's not like we're trying to recreate the wheel here. It's just trying to bring in a lot of our learnings and you know, take it across both sides and bring us together. It's no surprise that you're starting to see larger operators in the legal industry starting to actually potentially expand into it. They're doing a lot of research into it, and they have obviously extreme regulation and extreme taxation. But we're still very fragmented on the legal side. You know, it's like herding cats, trying to get things done. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. And just waiting for something to happen is not a good idea.
When you say legal, what do you mean?
So I'm talking about the adult use and medical.
You're like state regulated metric cannabis versus what's actually federally legal, which would be the hemp.
Exactly. Yeah, because we have no idea when the Farm Bill is going to be improved upon. We have no idea what it'll look like. And so if we're just sitting back waiting for it, in the meantime, you have a lot of groups that are just trying to make the quick buck. We've seen this again, like talking about back in 2014, we see a lot of groups that just try to come in really fast and try to do things that were not in the best interest for the long term.
Can I ask, the comparison here is between legal THCA and hemp-based THCA, like psychoactive hemp is what you guys are concerned about. You're not worried about the fiber or necessarily the CBD. We're talking about regulating this loophole that we have in the Farm Bill right now where they're selling comparable compounds.
And
right?
intoxicating hemp. That's right.
Intoxicating hemp. So specifically that type of hemp.
I think, that's
Like,
what
you
we
don't
should,
care
that's
about
what we
fiber.
should.
We don't
no.
need to regulate fiber.
Well,
CBD maybe not even nearly as much.
No, it does go beyond that. I mean, we're primarily talking about intoxicating hemp, but just over the past 24 hours here, the amount of information that's come up in and around animal feed and everything else, and how that's going to come into play, and what that's going to look like, and
I agree. I mean, it's really about intoxicating hemp.
Yeah.
And it's really about you have a large community that has invested a lot of money into a regulated program under marijuana that doesn't want hemp to exist because it's competition. I think any hemp person that's in this room would gladly raise their hand and say, hey, we care about packaging standards, we care about labeling standards, we care about all these sorts of things. And I can only speak for my state because I'm in Illinois, but our biggest opposition to passing a hemp regulatory structure has been the cannabis industry. And literally, like, on the spring session, I've got 10 lobbyists. They outnumber me 100 to 10. So they literally just swarm this stuff and everything like that. And that is the reality here is you have a limit, especially in limited license states, you've got people that have invested a lot of money and they're trying to protect their investment.
So question for you: should there be standards in the packaging, the ingredients?
I'm willing to match cannabis. I've had actually conversations with cannabis companies. I will take the CRTA, apply that to hemp, but I need to. So I'm the association guy in Illinois. So we represent, about 400 retail outlets plus, so we got about 30% of the industry. There's much more than that, but we're like the good actors. And we say we'll match cannabis, and they're saying, well, you need to have limited licenses because our business models, we sold investors that we have a licensed monopoly. And the problem is 280E's crushing these cannabis companies. They're out of money in 18 months, and they've got to go raise capital from a guy like Morgan. And if they go to Morgan and say, well, I sold you on the dream that I had a limited license and I had this, and now there's these hemp guys and they're selling kind of a similar thing and there's an open market, the investment thesis is break. Because you guys need federal descheduling to cash flow, and we, without 280E, can actually make money, even with the regulatory structure. And that's the big problem. So it's like.
Well, listen, that's how we're talking about it. I think do you like the Grateful Dead?
I do.
Yeah, there's a line: one man gathers what another man spills, right? So you have a hemp bill from 2018, and if you look at the Farm Bill, it's an agricultural bill, right? The topic on marijuana is about yay thin, right? And it came up for renewal in 5 years, and DC punts it, right? So should the Committee on Agriculture in the Senate and the House be responsible for managing this type of discourse? Versus well, yeah, exactly. But like, so
Having that bill.
totally, which I get, right? So you have a law that people are utilizing and they're trying to do it, and there's good actors, tons, right? There's bad actors in our space. So it's not about us versus them. It's about making sure that the bad actors follow rules. And if people follow rules, you're cool.
If you take it all the way back to the 2018 Farm Bill, it legalized all seeds. And so you kind of, it started these loopholes, if you were looking for them, at these really fundamental levels of what is cannabis sativa. And then you have regulation and also a lot of people who've never thought about cannabis sativa before trying to make laws about cannabis sativa that has now been divided in these two different pockets with special interests and a lot of money on the table. And so it just gets more and more confusing, and the more and more people who are like, I know how to make a law about this, and they haven't ever worked in the space, and they don't know what the seed versus the terpene versus the THCV or the CBC, and the danger of regulating around the plant itself and starting to chop it up is that you're losing opportunity for science and medicine and all of these different things. And so it's really, if we could come together, if it's SROs or However, you put this together and make it something so that the companies that are doing their best to regulate themselves, because we're in the hemp space, all regulating ourselves, if we're regulating ourselves at all, I guess I should say, that it would be, I mean, Laurel Crest would benefit greatly from anything being said about regulation because we've invested so much in
Explain what you
that
said
side.
earlier about all the phone calls you get with people who want you to make their products and the dilemma
Yeah.
that you're up against as a packager.
So, I mean, we get asked for all kinds of things. And you get asked over Signal, over text, over Telegram, over WhatsApp, over, whatever new thing comes out that someone doesn't think you can trace or whatever. And we're fairly conservative. I mean, we do lose money because of that as well. And, I was on a phone call earlier today where it's really like I'm choosing between like retesting a bunch of things and working with a lab, and the people are like, can you just change the COA? And I'm like, well, I can't. Do you know what I mean? But I'm saying, like, it's so regular. People are not. I think also that wasn't coming from someone who's trying to be like a bad actor. They don't want to lose the deal because there's also like a limited amount of opportunity, and there's someone who will come in right behind you and change the COA and take the money. And so, like, that's the thing. I feel like that's what we're always balancing. And so you can get asked for, like, 5,000 THCA pre-rolls for their hemp store in Texas, or you can be working with companies that are really, really dialed into their, the legal landscape and trying to navigate each state and every single thing that matters, and what you're making and your testing and all those things. And so Laurel Crest is set up to back up all of we're very well suited for a company that cares deeply about their testing, and we spend so much money on testing every single week, like thousands and thousands of dollars. But I think that's it also is very difficult to make money fast in that model and survive. So it's just a unique.
No. Go ahead and finish.
Well, it's just a unique question, like how do you self-regulate and at what point, because for every company it's different. And the packaging part, though, if you're going to go to packaging, there could be really clear laws around that is just like a non-negotiable thing where you like don't sell candy.
Well, we're going to move off packaging. So, the SRO conversation it's something that a lot of people talk about, but the reality of that is very minute, okay? They're not going to let us self-regulate anything that they don't understand. So we're just going to end up in the
They're not going to let the inmates run the asylum.
Exactly. Better said. I
Hemp has
had other
tried
puns, but
before.
they're kind of.
Hemp has tried before, and it was a joke. I'm
Right.
not going to name the name, but it didn't work at all. In fact, it was kind of counterproductive.
So if we think this is somewhat like 2014 and, here we are 10 years later and we're still holding our breath and thinking that Washington is eventually going to do something, they're not. Okay. So if we go back to, who's doing it well, there are some states that I think are actually doing this in a reasonable fashion. And you guys cited some examples on the call. John Harlow, you in particular, please.
I've been really interested in watching Minnesota because they seem to have found kind of a compromise, or at least they've separated their channels by 5 milligrams and 50 per container of THC. So from what I've heard there, it's allowed both sides to kind of switch back and forth depending on their preferred way of doing business. It's all anecdotal, but I hear less controversy coming out of Minnesota than a lot of other states. So the lightning rod will always be the potency and container limits, or serving and container limits. That's probably why the federal government, like the Wyden bill, doesn't even mention that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I think, where it goes. Florida almost passed a bill that was very similar to Minnesota. It probably will be passed next year, but who knows? So I'd go with those. I'm sorry?
In Florida, there was a veto, and the hemp and this is what happens when this happens in Florida. The hemp industry is putting $5 million into the Republican side to oppose the marijuana amendment, and that is a big problem now because literally you have, two sides who are supposed to be for one plant, and you have one side like probably 10,000 hemp retailers who are actually anti the marijuana referendum.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors about.
I'm not Floridian, so who else is in here from Florida?
Well, no, on the hemp
Orlando.
side.
But so that's not true that all hemp folks in Florida are against Amendment 3.
Right.
Right? Because there is a social justice component to Amendment 3 that means that nobody has to go to fucking jail for having smoking some weed. And it comes from my community. And they're tired of that shit. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to be done, but Amendment 3 creates an opportunity for folks to not go to jail. And then and we are believers in one plant, one community. And I didn't mean to hijack.
You're fine, Roz. Go, girl. Here, take over. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But I didn't mean to hijack. I want to remind us as the industry people to don't forget the people that this actually impacts, right? And I'll leave it right there. Thank you.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're great point. We have to remind ourselves that we're here at the expense of millions of people who have been victimized and fucked as a result of things that we're doing legally, right? So Missouri being a red state has
Still there. We're still
totally.
there.
Missouri being a red state has had one of the most expungements per capita in any state, and if we can do it as a red state, then other people can get off their tail and do the same thing.
One editorial comment, when you talk about the lobbyists and lobbying dollars, the alcohol beverage industry and their associated partnerships, their lobby dollars are way bigger than everybody in this room. And they're working hard. And are they in our favor or not in our favor? Watch what they do, okay? And watch how we can leverage that, because they're going to be able to swing votes better than we will, than we have been able to. You don't have to like it. It's just the way it works, okay? The system sucks.
Look
all
at
right?
New Jersey.
Yeah.
Look at what they just did. I mean, they wrote 29 pages on how to integrate THC beverages into their alcohol wholesale system.
Then look at what California
Spent one
did.
paragraph redefining hemp to include potency and container limits, basically wiped them out. So you've seen that now in Louisiana too, with their 40 milligram limit per container. And their serving sizes, where it seems to be catering towards just the beverages. So that's something that's kind of popped up in the last 6 months. It'll be interesting to see. But even in California, with Newsom's emergency regulations, the only press release I saw applauding it was from the beer industry. So they're getting involved now. They're just being kind of quiet.
They're getting heavily involved. So John Pennington, on our prep call, you had a great suggestion, okay? Let's have calls to action. What's the idea? Each of you got a minute. Share your best idea of what you think we can do.
Sure.
So I'm John Pennington for the moment. Well, again, I'm going to come back to the age thing because this is a concern of ours. There's a lot of shops out there that have popped up. I'm now hearing 10,000. I thought it was 9,000 in Florida, so now another 1,000 add to the list. They are just not doing a good job of making sure that whoever's at the point of sale is of age. And when I say of age, I mean 21 plus. Like this should just not even be a discussion. But that is a huge area that I don't even know how we get into enforcing that, because that's really kind of even lives outside of our world in a lot of aspects. Because these are just stores that are just popping up and they're filling their shelves up and they're selling it as quickly as they can, not even really caring what they're selling or who they're selling to. And that's where I just see a lot of risk for this entire ecosystem, regardless of where you sit. So that's an area that we've been talking a lot about internally at Poseidon. That is an area that has to get addressed, and we need help from the hemp side of things. Like, how do we go about penetrating these thousands of stores that are popping up that are not subject to any regulation?
Okay, I'm Morgan. Listen, I like rules. And I think when you have rules, you got to follow them. So, Missouri has very good rules for the legal cannabis side. So if I put on my Missouri selfish hat, I want to make sure that Missouri is run with the right standards. So if people want to create hemp products that have effects and are packaged, then just follow the same rules that we've invested in, right? It's a politicized issue, and we can't denounce that, in my opinion. So I think for people who have opinions and businesses, how are you engaged with your local legislators? How are you actually helping be a part of creating that change. And I think that's very real as much as it's cliche. And I think some of the people in this room, are a part of federal policy groups, of which I'm involved. And I think we, as a membership through the Cannabis Roundtable, work heavy in the halls of D.C. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings every single year, right? And it's about finding alliances with people like NCR who are at least going to penetrate the halls of D.C. and attempt to get rules done the right way. It's not going to be perfect, right? Things are never perfect, right? Consensus is key. So how do you get stakeholders together? So you have to get off the sidelines. You have to invest. You have to write checks. You have to support groups like NCR. And I would say if you're in the business and you're not involved with legislators, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
There you go. Go down on this shit.
I would second that, and I could do a better job as well being involved in Oregon. And I mean, we've invited people out to our facility, and I think the purpose of that is also spending that time is educating people around what we're actually trying to do as an industry, which is still, in my perspective, very hopeful. Even though there's a lot of issues, I mean, there is a lot of really good things. So getting out and talking to people about, especially your legislators, about what we're doing and bringing them as close into like the education process and making them comfortable with just the intention and spirit behind the cannabis industry, I think would be one of the calls to action. And if there is anything coming up to standardize testing, I would love to get behind that, whatever that is.
John Harlow, take us home.
I guess if I had a call to action, it'd be for a lot of the people on the opposite ends of the spectrum to come down to earth and be realistic. Right now, this is the biggest problem that I see, is you have this wide spectrum of interests. On one side, you've got, I'm going to be general here, so I hope I don't offend anybody, but you have MSOs that want to basically shut down the hemp industry entirely, throw the baby out with the bathwater and take the market share, if you want to be cynical. On the other side, you have the D8, HHC, all these people that are just selling intoxicating cannabinoids, and frankly, they have the money right now. And in the middle, you've got very few companies, ours, Charlotte's Web, that are trying to advocate for, let's establish two channels so that you can still continue to sell hemp products as designed as a therapeutic, and then also move the intoxicating cannabinoids to the regulated market as it's been proven successful in state after state. But until you have that, there's so many voices in the room that you'll go and meet with legislators and they're like, until you guys can get your crap together, don't come back here. And so you've just got all these different messages coming from all different directions. And as far as the people in charge see, it's like there's no consensus. So I'm just going to do what I think is best, which can run in the extremes, as we've seen. So,
And when you get a yes, stop, okay? Just advice. You know, when you make progress, take that as the victory that it is. Anytime, personal experience, and anybody in the room, you can agree or disagree. You talk to anybody in the legislative bodies and the offices. Andrew, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this one, if you don't mind. You know, if you go, oh, and by the way, I have one other thing. Don't do that, okay? Take the victory. Go home. Celebrate in the hall. It's frickin' Shark Tank. Don't come back in and ask for something else because you got another product. They don't like it. They get confused as hell. It's very simplistic how you have to approach them. Give it up for them.